All right, now I want to say a couple of words about human nature. What we find in the idealist tradition is a strong tendency toward seeing humans dualistically, right? Mind and body, or soul and body, or the spiritual and the physical are two distinct substances. In many respects, they are in contrast to each other and in conflict with each other, each ultimately having a different identity and a destiny. By contrast, the realists tend to an integrationist position. Our minds and our bodies are integrated, and they should function together. There's no opposition between the two. We can, of course, abstractly consider physical processes in many cases in isolation from psychological processes and vice versa, but the actual functioning and working of a complete human being in the ordinary course of affairs of life is a matter of mind and body, right, working together and hopefully working together harmoniously to achieve a flourishing human life, right, so to speak. Now, also in the idealist tradition, we found an emphasis on the original badness, I will call it, of human beings. We saw this in the religious traditions. The religious traditions, particularly the Western ones, have a dominant tradition of original sin, seeing sin being the most important fact about the human condition, the dominant fact about our moral character. In varying degrees, that religious tradition will argue that we are helpless to control our sinful natures, or if we do have some capacity to control our sinful natures, it's a rather weak capacity and is more often than not going to be dominated by sin. In the more non-religious idealist traditions, we find in Plato, for example, an emphasis on the myth of Gyges, and he gets great mileage out of the myth of Gyges. And Gyges, of course, was an individual who, once he acquired the power, let his base, antisocial, destructive appetites rule, and so he went on a very destructive crime spree. And so the assumption there in the myth of Gyges, like in the myth of the original sin story, is that human beings have within them a very powerful set of forces that lead them, if they have the power, in the direction of badness. What we find in the realist tradition is typically a more optimistic assessment of the raw material of humanity. It comes in a couple of forms. One form is a position we'll call Tabula Rasa, right, position. From the Latin here, you see the soul or the human being as a tablet that is erased, or erasa here, or a blank slate, that is to say, just focusing on the moral issue here, that we're not born bad, but neither are we born good. Instead, morally speaking, the human being is born with a set of capacities, and then depending on the choices the human makes, what kinds of influences he or she is exposed to, those capacities will then develop in a good direction or develop in a bad direction. But an emphasis typically is on the claim that the human being's identity, particularly their moral identity, is something that is acquired, right, rather than one is saddled with by birth, a certain set of predispositions that take you in a certain direction. A little more complicated here, though, on the realist side of the equation, because there are many realists who will argue that, in direct contrast to the idealists, that there's an original goodness in human beings, that rather than our capacities being in their very nature neutral, that instead our bias or our set, or that the natural development direction of our capacities is toward the good. So that, for example, we naturally want to use our bodies in healthy directions. We naturally want to grow, to become stronger, faster, taller, and so forth. We like to use our senses and observe the world and see pretty things and beautiful things. We like to use our minds and figure things out. We're naturally curious. And so we have in us a set of capacities that, even without any encouragement, are already going in the right kind of direction. And so our job as parents and teachers is simply to encourage that development that already is built into the human being, right, so to speak. Now, I want to turn here to the issue then of religion. I think we have enough to make some contrasts here. As I mentioned before, there are idealists who are religious and some who aren't, and the same holds for the realists. What we typically find in religious idealism is a dualism that runs through, right? That the human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm, and everything that the natural world is, the supernatural world is not, right? The supernatural world is higher, the physical world is lower. The higher world is beautiful and pure and perfect, whereas the lower world is corrupt and impure and so forth. And so what you find in religious forms of idealism is a very marked distaste for the physical world or the natural world and a corresponding exaltation of the higher supernatural world. One other thing that's an important implication, I think, in human nature, a contrast between the idealists and realists, as we saw last time, particularly in the case of talking about Plato, is there is a tendency, a marked tendency within idealism to see human beings, not only their moral character as having a more preset nativistic element to it, but also people's ability levels to be more preset. And so I'm going to put the word, right, nativism here with respect to abilities, that some people are by nature born very intelligent, other people's not born by nature very intelligent, other people born by nature with a strong spirited element that leads them to be interested in honor and glory and the finer things, and other people by nature not at all oriented in that particular direction. Some people more physically oriented, other people more intellectually oriented. And this had implications for the issue of tracking in the idealist tradition, since the educator's job then was to identify what the more or less preset ability levels of the individuals were in his or her class, and then start tracking students into appropriate curricula. For the realists, by contrast, one of the implications that comes out of the Tabula Rasa thesis is not a moral tabula rasa, but also a cognitive tabula rasa, or a skill level tabula rasa. It would be the claim that every human being, if she or she is born normal and healthy, has a set of capacities, including a brain capacity, and that capacity is potentially unlimited, right, in any given directions. Any given individual, depending on the choices he or she makes or the influences he or she is exposed to, could become proficient in music or in foreign languages or mathematics or woodworking or whatever it is. It's not the case that cognitively we are preset, right, and locked into a certain developmental path. And so we are tabula rasa in that particular respects as well, both morally and cognitively.